Chris is editorial page editor and longtime chief theater critic at the Chicago Tribune, and is also the Broadway critic for the New York Daily News. At the Tribune, he writes many editorials and oversees the Tribune's editorial board, as well as the publishing of all original op-eds on local, national, and international issues. Chris is best known for saying that in Chicago, politics is theater. An author and journalist, Chris has taught and served as associate dean at DePaul and Northern Illinois universities. A native of Manchester, England, Chris has lived and worked in and around the Chicago area for more than 30 years. He received his PhD in cultural history from The Ohio State University. Now on to our speaker, who recently said about himself, "When you do a search with the words diplomat and Rahm, the results come back, search not found." So clearly it was a sea change at the State Department when Rahm Emanuel was named U.S. Ambassador to Japan in 2021, where he was the first ambassador to use Tokyo's public transit system. During his tenure in Japan, he had the first trilateral meetings with the Philippines and the U.S. and revised their long-standing defense policy that resulted in doubling the amount earmarked for military spending and crafting an agreement to allow U.S. naval ships to be repaired in Japan. It was a 3-year period described by the Japan Times as arguably the most consequential shift in the bilateral alliance in decades. But in a country steeped in the polite political process of consensus building, Rahm's unorthodox brand of diplomacy prompted him to submit his resignation at the beginning of his tenure to be used by President Biden whenever he saw fit. No stranger to this crowd, Ambassador was Chicago's mayor from 2011 to 2019. He represented Illinois as a 4-term congressman from 2002 to 2008 and was President Obama's chief of staff during his first 2 years of administration. With the change in administration, Rahm is back from Tokyo with his first post-Biden presidency role as a senior political and global commentator at CNN. He also appears as a regular contributor to the Washington Post editorial page. To tell us what lies ahead, welcome to the Economic Club of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many people here in this packed room. I had a bunch of questions that were all sort of sweet, welcome back, Rahm questions that I'm going to skip because there's just so much we need to talk about that's more important than that. So let's
We're going to skip the welcome part.
Yeah, I'll wait. We'll skip that. But welcome back, seriously. This past week, we're all treated to a sort of extraordinary display in the Oval Office that the visit from Mr. Zelensky with President Trump and Vice President Vance that most Democrats saw as an appalling event unworthy of the dignity of the Oval Office and potentially encouraging Vladimir Putin to invade other vulnerable republics, like, say, the Republic of Georgia, for one. That was the general Democratic view from many friends of yours. Now, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, went on the media this weekend to defend President Trump, and his arguments were basically those of realpolitik grounds, you might say, that nobody says that Putin should get a Nobel Peace Prize, but the fact is there's a war, he's there, all wars end with negotiation. You don't get anybody to the negotiating table if you're calling them names. Therefore, he would argue that Trump was the only person who could possibly make a difference. And bolstering his argument, we saw in Europe lots of European nations sort of waking up to the horrors that they'd just seen and coming up with their own plan for peace. So does that mean that President Trump and Vice President Vance were right to do what they did in the Oval Office?
Well, you are the theater critic. You should have.
You get to use that once.
So let me say just 20 things about that. First, I think it if I can, I just can't go without observing this, that the Secretary of State said that you shouldn't be calling names. Like, I don't know who called who a dictator. So it's kind of a little bit of ironic that you're saying name calling shouldn't be used when the only people they were using name calling were the people saying you shouldn't use it. That's one. Two, there's the basic inequilibrium here is that the president is trying to end the war. President Putin is trying to end Ukraine. That's just not the same thing. And what President Zelensky was, and I'm not here as his lawyer, nor would he hire me as one because I'm not a lawyer, he was trying, he's stuck in a position where he was saying, look, I want to end the war. I'm the one that's lost people. They've lost thousands of lives. And I want to end the war. I just don't want to end Ukraine as the price, and the president's willing to say, give it away. Now, I do mean this, you're the theater critic, but words are important. The other day, President Trump said, I trust and verify, using a twist on President Reagan. President Reagan, trust but verify, meaning the emphasis was on verify, where President Trump was the emphasis was on trust. And when you look at the history of Ukraine going all the way back to 1918, and including 1994, where we convinced them to give up nuclear weapons because of the pledge of the United States for their security, the last thing you could do is trust anybody, because Ukraine has been basically shunted aside many, many times. Europe tried to make a commitment in the Minsk agreements. There was the Minsk agreements. There are the other agreements between the Germans with the Russians and the Ukrainians there and the French. They have a right to be skeptical about trust. And lastly, let me say, as it relates to last week, and I think one of the outgrowths of this that I don't think anybody is paying attention to, and this may come out of my own experience in the Far East. Look, one of the pledges that we make as a country is that God forbid, that's the principle of NATO, is God forbid something happens to you, we have the capacity of nuclear protection. That's also our pledge to many of our allies in the Far East. What would make you as a leader trust the United States now? And I think one of the outgrowths is that you're going to have a proliferation of countries that get their own nuclear weapons. If you think non-proliferation was expensive, you have no idea the price of proliferation. Now, I was on the margins of this, a ton of time trying to keep South Korea from getting nuclear weapons. They made a pledge that they wouldn't do it. Today, if you're South Korea, I don't care which government, what would allow you to say, you know what, I'm going to put the security of my country, remember, Seoul is not that far from the 38th parallel, I'm going to put my trust in the United States. Now, if South Korea goes nuclear, I'm not saying Japan will, but a lot of countries are going to say, okay, what are we doing? And you already have, that means China, North Korea, South Korea, India, Pakistan. Now, Germany, the new government's already said, we have to look at a different alternative on nuclear. And I said this the other night, obviously, I'm both serious about this. The fastest rising power in Germany is a neo-Nazi party. The country now is talking about nuclear. As my grandfather and my father would say, is oy vey. That is not a good combination. And so I looked at, like you said, what happened from the theater. The problem of, this is true in all our lives, it's true in politics, trust is your most important currency. And the United States is having a tremendous damage to its trust. Lastly, I'll close on this one point, and I wrote about this in the Post, but we have a security, our industrial base, military industrial base, is not at the level we need it for the security challenges we have. There's a whole history of how we got here, et cetera. Both parties, both branches of the different sides of Pennsylvania Avenue are responsible. Our allies are key in the short and medium term to being a multiplier to the credibility of our deterrence. If our allies walk away from us or don't go the full length with us, we are in massive problem. Philippines is an example of that, a treaty ally, the United States working with Japan, Australia, the Europeans, that brings credibility to our deterrence. The President of the United States wants to expand on export controls to China. You have on export controls Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the Dutch standing shoulder to shoulder with the United States. What brings credibility to the export controls. Name me one country today that's going to say, you know what, we're going to go for the next step on your export controls. So I just think as theater, it was one thing. As real politics, it was not.
But what would you specifically do now if you were the president to end that war, assuming we should end that war?
Well,
in Ukraine, I'm speaking.
Well, the first step is, you know, part of President Putin's weakness is there's a couple things. One, he's lost Europe. Two, he's got NATO expanded on his border with Finland. Three, his economy. You guys, you know, Austin Goolsby's here. It's his fault, but, you know, interest rates in the United States are 4%, 4.25%. In Russia, it's 21%. And the oligarchs are now complaining. The economy has got 10% inflation. They can't run like this. The economy can't go much longer. The other thing, if you know anything about drone warfare, and I want to come back to this in a second, the last year of the war has been worse than the first 2 years because technology has changed on the battlefield from armaments to drones. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second. One, President Putin is saying, I can outlast you. So put Ukraine in a stronger position from the sense of time.
Which is what Trump has argued, right?
Well, he's arguing cut your time. I'm saying extend it.
Yeah.
Show that you're willing to extend it. The opposite. Two, the United States acting like it's a mediator wasn't really, it was sitting across from Russia. You don't ever have us sitting across from the Ukrainian delegation. So you're not really an honest mediator in that sense. But if you are going to play that role, if you say NATO is off, which nobody really thought it was in, you say EU is in. You can say, okay, we're going to talk about this land of Ukraine, but we're going to talk about this land in Russia because Ukrainian soldiers are in Russia right now. You got to be willing to show that if you're going to play that arbitrating, mediating role, which is the right place for the United States, you say, this is what mediation looks like. We haven't done that. So add credibility back to that role. Third, the president, I disagree, you know, our foreign policy used to be between isolationists and internationalists. It's now becoming between predator versus principle. And we're acting like a predator country, which is really a bad place for the United States. Mm-hmm. That said, he's all about the minerals. And minerals are important. Critical minerals are important, making sure they are important for our security. But I'm not in the mineral business, but it's probably 10 years before you really get any value out of that, on a good day. Mm-hmm. One of the things you know today, 3 years ago, Ukraine had no military-industrial capacity. They build drones in 30 days and have them on the battlefield like this. And you want to change the United States government? Deal with the Pentagon's procurement process. It is the worst thing in the world. And I'm being calm when I talk about that. Literally, if DOGE wanted to be helpful, go reform that. I'll lead the effort. The procurement process, now there, you could say, as a defense industry, today almost 30 to 40% of Ukraine's drones comes from their own defense industry. We could do a licensing agreement, we could do a partnership where we get real technology that is essential for the wars and the battlefields of the future in 30 days real time. They have built an industry, they've built a procurement process, they have new drones on the battlefield within 30 to 40 days. To me, the agreement, I'm not saying minerals are wrong, but if you wanted to actually add to our deterrence, build up the country's own self-defense so they have their own kind of deterrence against Russia, you would actually do a partnership with their defense industry that would build that up and reform a thing that both Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, in the White House, think is fundamentally broken, and that is the procurement process at the Pentagon. It is the only place where you get rewarded for failing. And wait a second, I'm on a roll. Quiz. Name me 3 weapon systems that have been on time or on budget in the last 20 years. Any 3. And I'm not talking about a jacket. Name 3 weapon systems that General Dynamics, Grumman, Lockheed, Raytheon, or Boeing has produced on time. And I'm telling you, I have an intimate knowledge of this, so I know the answer. Bupkis, as my grandmother would say. I wanted to give her equal time here in Yiddish. It's ridiculous. And Ukraine has shown how to build a defense industry in real time. And that, to me, is where the United States would benefit from having a strong, independent, sovereign Ukraine. And we could be a partner and get actually more than just money back, more than just minerals back, a revolution in what we need because we're behind from a defense industrial-based capability.
Separately but arguably related, Trump has also proposed a kind of Trump theme park in Gaza. His defense of it, as after sort of Democrats responded in the way you might expect, but his defense was, what other idea is on the table? And there's an argument, perhaps some have made, saying that that's true, and that at least this guy is going to get people talking about what that future could be. And how do Democrats get from simply reacting negatively to that argument and start talking about what they actually want to happen in Gaza?
Well, first, you can't, I know you're asking the questions, but it would be wrong Talmudically if I didn't say you have the wrong question, okay? That's the Reform side of the synagogue right over there. So you can't separate just Gaza from everything else that's going on. One, the United States is not, and this gets back to also trust and veracity. What's the over-under on the fact that we're taking control of Gaza, like the president says? That we're going to build real estate there and take it over? What's the over-under?
I give out remote odds.
Remote? I'll take, okay. So my point is, that's one. 2, you have to look at the last, not just this last 12 months, you got to look at 70 years. One is, today you finally have a Lebanese government that's operating because Hezbollah has been degraded to the point that they can not only on the battlefield, but politically hold that country hostage. And we're supporting it. 2, the Syrian Assad regime is out, and Iran is out of both of those countries and definitely degraded. 3rd is Iran in the last 14 months is not just because of Lebanon and not just because of Syria, also in Gaza, but also because of what happened in the last 12 months. Iran is in the worst strategic position you've ever had. That has been a project since the revolution of '79. Lastly, you had this growing alliance between both Israel and basically the Sunni but aligned countries with the United States, building off the Abraham Accords. Now, and it's been tested over the last 12 months because of the way the war was conducted, but you had a unique moment to not only isolate Iran, but then to form this and bring cohesion to this coalition that would stabilize the Middle East. If you're going to talk about moving to Asia, you need a stable Middle East. The comments about Gaza, not only are they not happening, the lasting damage is every one of the other countries that are aligned with the United States are on their back heel with their own domestic population. So they're picking between aligning with the United States or aligning with their public. You did that to Saudi Arabia, where the average age under 40 is the dominant part of the country, who have a different feeling on that. And that's a young leader. You've done it in Jordan. You've done it in Egypt. You've done it in a lot of the other Gulf countries. To me, we actually finally had exactly the position where it wasn't between us picking the fork in the road. Iran was in the fork in the road. And it's a massive miss. And it wasn't about, if you wanted to create pressure on Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia to do something on Gaza, well, I got about 5 other ways you could have done that. than the one that makes you look, A, you're not going to execute on what you said, and B, you put them in a bad domestic political situation. And if you're trying to get them to stretch themselves, putting them in a bad place domestically is not a good idea. And lastly, let me say then this as somebody who's going back to the Oslo Accord, the Y Plantation, Camp David. There are 3 areas for Israel that they've operated on the peace side for 40 years. One was negotiated, Egypt, Jordan, and the Abraham Accords. And every one of the countries that are part of those peace agreements have helped Israel on their security, both economic integration into the region and on their own security. You saw it in the last 12 months dealing with Iran. 2, Israel's tried unilateral, Lebanon and Gaza, and they got Hezbollah and Hamas. And 3, on the West Bank, they tried divorce. The only tactic of the 3 that worked was negotiated. And to me, in the end of the day, the role for the United States isn't like, this is what we're going to do in Gaza and not going to happen and destroy your credibility, is get to a place of a negotiated agreement of peace. And it could be both with sovereign nations and the other ones, because in the end of the day, and I'm not saying anything that leadership of the IDF and the security establishment of Israel hasn't said, that is the only way you achieve not only lasting peace, lasting security, but also lasting integration into the region, which is exactly what the founding fathers of the State of Israel have always asked for. And the consequences of Gaza go beyond the geography of Gaza. And that's how you have to look at the region.
Let's turn our attention to the Democratic Party. I'm going to quote from...
Well, that's a lot of theater.
I'm going to quote from Tina Brown, who said this about you. There's never been a more appropriate time to hear from Rahm, the intellectual pugilist who rose from Chicago to big city mayor, the consummate political strategist with the smash-mouth style that belies the pointy head beneath his lethal, silver-haired composure. She kind of made you sound like the James Bond of the East Bank Club, I thought. But she also said this, he has a bullseye understanding and has been lighting up the podcast circuit, which we all know to be true, his bullseye understanding of who sunk his party. So my question is, who sunk your party?
We did. We did. We sunk our party. We're responsible for that, and we're also then therefore responsible for rebuilding it. Now, it wasn't, the misnomer is to think it's a one-election mistake. Now, look, I mean, I'm not loyal to President Clinton and President Obama just because I worked in administrations, but that'd be good reason to be loyal. I'm loyal because I think they were right on a host of things. They got things wrong, but everybody does. But they are the only 2 Democrats reelected since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And who trashes Obama and President Clinton? Or President Obama and President Clinton? Democrats. Like, I don't know, that would not be the place I would start, okay? Because nobody else done what they've accomplished. And I think we're responsible for a host of reasons. Let me just say this. When you look at the arc of, let's say, just take 2008 as your benchmark, President Obama's election to where we are today, okay? After 2008 and 12, his election and his re-election, we have been losing, well, let me try to illustrate this point. If you had told me in 2008, let alone in 1996 or 1992, Silicon Valley would walk away from a Democratic nominee, I said, impossible. That's what happened. Urban America, impossible. That's what's happening. Not walked away, but things that you think you own. So breaking news, this is going to be taught at the Kennedy School of Government. Politics is addition, not subtraction. And we've been doing subtraction really well. Really well. Not working class, white working class African American, working class Hispanic, Silicon Valley. So at some point, stop and realize that politics is addition. And you got to do this. Now, I think we're responsible for a host of reasons, and we're responsible for fixing it. But we sometimes make it a little harder than it needs to be. Now, there's a lot to unravel. I said this when I did an Ezra Klein thing. There are 3 layers of what happened in 2024, but it's part of a trend. I think the most important is the deeper trend. If I said on the first trend, look, when 70% of the country thinks it's headed in the wrong direction, that's structurally against an incumbent. Second trend, Kamala Harris runs below the ticket, which is unusual for presidential. Had she not run below the ticket, you would have probably had 2, if not 3 more senators in the Senate column. Definitely 2 in my view. But the core issue is, and the core issue of what's wrong, but also what we build back. Look, the Iraq War, in my view, was one of the great foreign policy mistakes of the country in its entire history. It's built on a lie. We spent well over $1 trillion, lost thousands of men and women, both to death and to permanently maimed, and not one person was ever held accountable. They sit at universities, they sit on corporate boards, they sit like pontificating. Never once did somebody come and say, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. We're wrong. You asked me a big question, I'm gonna give you a big answer. Number 2, we did it in the financial crisis. And bankers, when you told them they messed up, they go, we deserve our bonus. No, you don't. People lost their homes. So people lost their livelihood and lost their lives. And nobody was held accountable. And it was the first time in a generation in American history, parents thought their kids' future was worse than theirs. And guess what? The American dream, I don't know everybody in this room. I don't. I can barely see past these tables. Our kids are going to be fine. But it's not the American dream if all Americans don't have access to that dream. And it's been 30 years. It didn't happen. It did not happen one year. It did not happen one presidential. It's been a process where the American dream, owning a home, saving for your kids' education, your retirement, and you're not a health care sickness away from the poorhouse. And my view is it's inaccessible, it's unaffordable, and for a Democratic Party, that's unacceptable. That the American dream is only allowed for people above $300,000 a year. That's wrong. We've broken faith with you. There's nothing that's worked either democratically or economically to give people confidence in the establishment. Now, fast forward, in COVID, Democrats put on the coat of the establishment. This is what the science says. Well, I don't know. I came from a medical family. My dad would say, do this. I would say, I would like a second opinion. I don't really like your opinion. We closed schools. We closed places of worship longer than they had to be. And so we became this voice of establishment. And we did not play true, since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, through presidents, to the commitment that all Americans have access to the American dream. Owning a home where you build wealth and provide for your family. Making sure not only you have a retirement, your kids have a ticket and a passport to the American dream themselves. And that you can have health care without worrying about a sickness that will put you in the poorhouse and put you behind the 8 ball for the rest of your life. That is not hard to both express, but also to understand that over the last 30 years, both the political and economic system, and we're all part of it, I'm part of it, we have failed the American people, and they're pissed off, and guess what? They earn the right to be pissed off at all of us. Everybody in this room, all of us. And we have to, as a party, not just build back the party, build back America. Build back America for the American people so that their children can look to the future with some sense of optimism. That, to me, is the core purpose of what the Democratic Party has been, and we've been sidetracked from it.
So this is the question. This is the answer that you may get. This is the thing that actually most interests me. You've become part of this group of folks. I would include people like James Carville, Bill Maher, as the kind of truth tellers about the Democratic Party, but you guys usually express it in terms of what the focus should be, what the language should be. So, for example, Carville will say, stop talking like you're in the faculty lounge, or stop focusing on who's using a bathroom.
That's only because Carville could never make it to the faculty lounge.
But seriously, some Democrats say that it's not about that language. It's not about, when you guys say things like, well, it can't all be about DEI, or it can't all be about trans rights, you have to, pick your message, pick your messenger. Some Democrats on the left say, that's not about language. Those are our core values. And so we are not going to change that because they are actually what we believe in. So you're there saying, okay, I guess my question is, what are you saying? Are you just saying communicate differently, or are you saying
first of all,
change your policies?
No,
You see what I'm asking, though?
No, but I'm going to give you the answer anyway. All right, well, Henry Kissinger had a great quote. Does anybody have any questions for my answers? So let me say this about that. I think, the premise of the question is that it's like one thing. Given where we are, it's not one thing is going to fix it all. Now, I've said this before, but I think, to the other piece of the question. Before you got, since you used James Carville, before you get to, it was the economy, stupid, was James coined in 1992, there was a whole different set of issues related to how people live their lives, respect for their values. There was what's been shorthanded to Sister Soldier, 100,000 community police officers, ending welfare as we know it, and there's a lot of policies that go below those headlines. That was President Clinton. President Obama, the other successful president, was protested for being a deporter-in-chief on immigration. He talked about fatherhood. President Clinton gives a major speech, not only with the 3 covenants, but also Sister Soldier was done in a place of worship. President Kennedy does a speech in Texas on being a Catholic and not being a Catholic president, but a president who is Catholic. President Obama beforehand gives a major speech dealing with father right. I say all that by way of context, which is to get to the economy, stupid, there was a series of threshold credibility about the character. Now, there are values of inclusion that represent the party. But we went from a party that has a value system around acceptance to a value around advocacy. And on the assertive issues, no. And B, I say this in all sincerity, look, it's very, as I said on the other night, that's a different format, enough about the locker room, enough about, the bathroom, let's start focusing on the classroom. And I say it then, one, it's important for the child transitioning. I get it. That's very important. How about 2/3 of your kids not being able to read at 8th grade level? That also counts. So you can either lose a generation, or we can get wrapped around an axle that the other side of the country wants us to stay focused on. Now, I'm going to say this right now. We're having a debate about pronouns, right? Well, what if you have 2/3 of your kids that don't know what a pronoun is? Okay, and nobody is raising their voices. You just had the worst reading scores in 30 years, worst math scores in 30 years. And we're talking about bathrooms, locker rooms. Well, you can't be a party that believes in equity and allow 2/3 of your kids can't read. 2/3 of your kids. I grew up in a home, a Democrat was one of the 10 lost tribes of the Jewish people. Equity is a principle. Everybody in here walks around, oh, I believe in equity. Well, I believe in equity. I believe the sincerity of you believing in equity. Tell me, in 5,000 years of human history, a society that succeeded where there wasn't equity in education or education wasn't core. It's never happened. We have the worst reading scores and math scores. And you know what I find interesting? Since I've kind of been talking about this as Ezra Klein, always ask me, well, what would you do? Everybody's into you attacked woke culture. That's only a piece of it. Because I think it's misguiding us from a discussion. You've heard how many people have read 5 stories about USAID? How many people have, yeah, it's not really a show of hands, I just gave you your answer. How many people have read stories about woke? Okay. How many people read about what happened in the Oval Office occurred? Worst reading scores in 30 years. Came one day left. Well, guess what? You don't get a do-over in education. You're here in this room because you have a good education. I don't know all of you. Your kids have a good education. We owe it to the next generation. Here's what Michelle Obama said, and I'm 1,000%. You walk through the door of opportunity, your job is not to grab the door handle and close it. Your job is to grab the next hand and pull it through. And the only door I know that has succeeded time and time and time again is in education. The only door. And we owe the next generation. And I believe, look, I talked earlier to the young leadership here about what we should do in this city. This is not to talk about my record, but since I'm here, let's talk about it. Sean Reardon, Stanford, said Chicago public schools were the best public schools out of Stanford in the country because we were an outlier on reading, on graduation, on math scores. There's things to do right. We turned our high schools to guarantee that post-high school education was universal. To me, this is the most important subject. And if we're going to compete and win the future, whether it's against China or our own future, where they have 1.4 billion people and we have 350 million, you're not going to compete if 2/3 of our children can't read and can't do math. It's a national crisis, and I mean, I am a product of my experience. Governor Clinton would have asked for a national governors meeting on this crisis. Should we go into year-long, if you failed, should you have mandatory summer school? Debatable. Should you have that for not only reading and math, but all other academic things? We are still dealing, there's no doubt about it, with the fumes and the exhaust of having done what we did during COVID. And that's what the data shows, is the worst. We basically, consciously, willfully, subjugated a generation to failure. And not just in 8th grade math, and not 8th grade reading. We subjugated them to that out of a sense we're following the science. And it's a real consequence, so therefore we have to ameliorate it, not just to make up for what happened in COVID, but to make up so they have a chance, if you believe in equity, in a future. And that's on all of us.
Let me ask you a question I'm personally...
You've asked me like 5 of them, so go ahead.
Let me ask you a question I'm personally invested in. So I think everybody in Chicago can see your phenomenal talent and intellect and political skills. I'd go even further and say there's a certain civic pride in you. Probably from the people. I mean that. I think that's a...
I'm like sitting here braced for the butt.
I'm not getting there yet. But
like a wind shear for the butt.
But everybody in this room also knows that there's a certain resistance to you on the far left of the party. Well, let's call it the progressive wing of the Democrats. It seems to me you could make an argument that's impeding your future career and arguably impeding the future of this country. So my question is, would you consider, and this is the opposite of what you've been doing this weekend, I think, but would you consider, however you want to define this, making up, for want of a better term, with that wing, so that you could achieve all that I think a lot of people in this room think you could achieve?
Okay, well, first of all, don't worry about Rahm.
Don't. Oh, we do worry about Rahm.
Oh, well, I appreciate it, but you don't worry enough. No. Look, okay, don't worry about me. I'm fine. I've had an unbelievable career. I got 3 incredible kids. Amy and I just came off of an incredible experience. I'm fine. I'm not going out of my way. You said this, so I want to correct you again, Chris. I didn't go out of my way to what I said about bathrooms and locker rooms versus a classroom to attack the left or attack woke. I said it because we are not focused on our priorities. Now, politically, if you want to win back the country, you should be focusing on the classroom. Because a lot of people, trust me, think that we have been way focused on the wrong things. Second, the experiences out of President Clinton, President Obama, is we have come across as a party not only focused on these issues, but people think that's all we're focused on at the expense of other issues. And third, I happen to think at the fundamentals, the classroom is important, and we're not having that debate. And if all I did is try to bring that elevated, good. Now, I think you're a little wrong. I can show you on some people on the left, but I'll take the general principle to be correct. I don't think it's actually
So
universal.
stipulated, yeah.
We'll stipulate
stipulate
it,
that.
But you're wrong, but you're stipulated.
We'll stipulate that too.
Yeah, we'll stipulate. Let's just start. You're wrong, but okay. To be gracious to you.
So
I'll accept-
stipulate.
Yeah, okay. So the fact is, I'm not looking to have a fight because I think right now, and I would said this at different events, we don't have a bucket to spit in or a window to throw it out of. Thank you for that. I know the power of the microphone in the Oval Office. I know the power of the gavel in Congress. We don't have either. And contrary to the Supreme Court justice saying that he just calls balls and strikes, we also don't have the courts. He may think of himself as an umpire. Say it ain't so, Joe. I don't know. So, and not just on him. So that said, I'm not interested. You know, we agree on 80%. I want to focus like a laser, all of us. You'll have answers, I'll have answers, I'll have respect, etc., on what we got to do to not only build the party up, but to win. I'm going to bring my skill set, my intelligence, my efforts to do that. I'm not looking for a fight with you, but I'm definitely not looking to airbrush what happened in 2024, why it happened, because if you're going to fix something, you got to understand the fundamentals of what happened. And if you think doubling down on I'm using this metaphorically, on a woke culture discussion, which is exactly what the MAGA folks want, which is why they're throwing red meat in there and throwing the red meat. They want us to have this discussion. There's a reason they want you to have this discussion, because you're missing everything else that's happening at the kitchen table, at the street corner, on the front stoop, at the classroom, at the coffee pot, at the workplace. We're off kilter. And if you look at your successful national campaigns and your successful national candidates, they were right on a set of cultural issues that was a permission slip. Now, again, in 06, when we were recruiting people out of national security, it was why? Because the messenger is the message. So there's a political piece to this, and there's also a value piece to this. And I care deeply about education. I wasn't saying that to have a fight with the woke culture. That's what you guys in the media. No, I get the catnip. I get it. I wasn't looking to have a fight on woke culture. I was looking to have a debate about the failure of 8th graders to read. Now, I get why the political class would want to then say, oh, he's taking on the woke. I did to try to bring some attention to a discussion that has been totally absent since those test scores have been written about. And I've actually, no, this is not to put you on the defensive, I've looked at the Tribune. It's not like you guys are beating the drum on this. It's not like any pay, and it's not to pick on the Tribune. Not like you're beating the drum on it. The NAEP scores came, and that was yesterday. So my view is to raise this, and again, I don't think culturally we were, that being not just in the generic woke debate is wrong politically. It's also the data's pretty clear that people think that's all we care about. It's clear based on what Donald Trump ran against Kamala Harris, they were going to use that. So I think there's a political piece to this, and then there's a fundamental piece. It's distracting from a discussion that we need to have with the American people, because if we're not talking about, and they can't hear what we're having to say because we have a series of blocks, there's a real policy choice here. I want to get to this discussion that they are going to cut your health care to pay for tax cuts of the rich. That is what they're going to do. And if we're over here having a locker room discussion, they're going to walk out with trillions of dollars that door to a bunch of people, in all due respect, who are in this room, that don't deserve a tax cut. You don't. We don't. We've done really well. Try going talking to a single mother who's got 2 kids, who's living one healthcare premium away from boom. And you're going to cut her healthcare, her kids' healthcare? So a bunch of
Let's.
No, I'm trying to figure out a better word I can't. So let's get to the next question. Well, there's a bunch of self-absorbed people who are too wealthy. Austin and I'm picking on you now, Austin. I was just telling him, I read a story the other day in the Bloomberg. 50% of the consumer spend is coming from people making $250,000 or above. And we've now had the highest delinquency rate since 2007, right before the massive economic recession. That is not a good cocktail. And the last thing we need, beyond adding to the national debt, is rewarding people who are in the high off and taking it out of the pocket, because the number one cause of individual bankruptcies, healthcare costs. This is insane. And we can't get the American people to hear that because we're off talking about locker rooms that aren't core to what's happening.
Let's in our last.
Again, I want to say one thing. They are core. Because it's. I understand look. We dealt with this issue in 2016, as it relates to bathrooms, et cetera. We dealt with it in 2016 when I was mayor. We also happened to get the NBA All-Stars because North Carolina did the wrong thing. We brought them here, okay? I get it. That child, it's a big issue for the child and it's a big issue for the family, and we as a society have to be welcoming. But it is not more important. It is not more important and doesn't trump a generation who can't read. It's a value. It's an important value. A generation that can't read is an important value, especially if you believe in equity.
We have about 10 minutes left, so let me turn our attention to our city and Chicago. So my first question is, will you consider running again? You don't know what I'm going to ask yet. And there are those who say that you're thinking about this who claim to be well-sourced.
Really?
Yeah, really.
You guys called Amy?
It's a straight question. Will you consider running again for the mayor of Chicago?
I've said it before, I'm going to say it again. I'm not done with public service, and I'm hoping public service is not done with me. So I love it. I know it's hard for you to believe or it's hard for me to believe. I've been back 5 weeks. So I want to take some time to think about what I'm going to do. And I've had a really, really fortunate life, and Amy and I had a fortunate experience in Japan, but I'm going to take some time to think about it. But public service is in my future. I just don't know where.
So it's not a no?
Well, it's not a yes either.
And if I were to say governor of Illinois, should the present governor move on to other things, is your answer the same?
Maybe a different order, yes and no, but no and yes, okay? No, but here's what I'll say. I think JB's been a great governor. If he seeks re-election, I'm going to back him up 100%.
I do think also, this is related to this, I think some people are wondering, have we lost you to the broader geopolitical world? Like, are you a local? We have, you live here. I think you've come back here.
I pay taxes here.
What?
I pay taxes.
Right. But are your ambitions now beyond us, or are you still? I remember you telling me once that you'd wanted to be mayor of Chicago simply because it was the most personal ambition. It was the thing you most wanted to do when you came back from Washington, and you did it. Where are you with that now? How central is Chicago going to be? And I say this because President Obama, although he's obviously building his library here, we don't see him every day. I mean, where are you at with Chicago?
What do you care? You're still going to get a good table at a restaurant. I'm not going to take it from you. So first of all, I moved back. That should tell you a lot. It doesn't need a lot of hermeneutics to understand that. Okay. Amy and I call Chicago home, and we live here. So that's one. Two, I don't know, if you're a global city, you should probably be happy one of your citizens has a little global experience. So that's one take. Third, I said this before, and Chicago is my home, and it is where I feel at home. we had a great experience, and I'm hoping I bring that back. That opens up, as a citizen in Chicago, a whole nother part of the region that I hope to be an instrument for the city's growth and the state's growth capability. We did it when I was ambassador. If you think the quantum partnership, computing partnership between the University of Tokyo, and I put a bunch of universities in the hat, and I pulled out the University of Chicago by coincidence, I got a bridge over the Tigris River you could buy, okay? And if you think the kid from Chicago who did a ethanol and a beef and a corn deal and a soybean deal wasn't thinking of Illinois, then I don't know what I can do to help you. So look, this is home. I'm happy I had that experience, and I think we are the only inland global city in the United States of the world. Every other global city in America is on the coast. We're the only inland.
And how are we doing?
We have our work cut out for us. But it's all on us. We had our work cut out for us, but you compete. You don't, it's not a standstill. It's not like you hit an equilibrium there. We have great strengths, and we got to keep building on those strengths to stay a global city. At your airport, at your cultural institutions, at your academic institutions, at your global headquarters, and companies in your workforce that has the capacity to compete and win in the global era. So you got to invest in them. Now, I say that, but again, let's get back to my favorite subject. You asked about me, so let's talk about it. So I say that as a understanding that I'm not just going to kind of use this to make sure that I have a room at O'Hare. This is where I'm home. This is where we're going to live. This is where we raised our kids. This is where our home is. And I'm continuing to be Chicago home. Everybody across Tokyo and the rest of Japan knows where I'm from. Trust me. Now, as I said, I spent 3 years there. For the Japanese, it felt like a full 30, but it was definitely 3 years.
So I got one last question, and it's actually about Japan. Sometimes late at night, I watch TikTok, and I see these things from Japan that are often very sort of admirable. So, for example, the little kids go to school alone in Japan, and the whole community helps them get where they're going. Or the train that keeps running because one student needs to take that train in order to get to class. And we have a picture of Japan as this cooperative, community-oriented, warm country that we often see our own country as being divided and more aggressive. I'm wondering what you glean from that in Japan, and very specifically what Chicago and the US can do to bring that sort of lesson to us.
I used to say look, if you're honest with yourself, and I said this to also the Japanese audience, in the American mind's eye, there's Tokyo, Ginza, neighborhood with the nightlife, Mount Fuji, there's a kind of onsen in the winter with the monkeys. That's your mind's eye. I used to say, I climbed Mount Fuji. It's beautiful from a distance. The most beautiful thing is watching 5-year-olds by themselves, this big, a backpack this big, their uniform, walk 8-9 blocks to school without a safe passage worker every block. Get to a crosswalk, know exactly where to go, put their hand up, cars come to a stop, and the kids walk across the street equally of walking across Michigan Avenue. It's sublime. Now, I was going to get arrested because I was taking pictures of these little kids. And I think parents were going to arrest me, and they're very particular about privacy there appropriately. But there's a social, now remember, it's not the same thing. There's a social cohesion of an island nation that is 99% one ethnicity versus a country like in our public schools, 147 languages are spoken. When I say that, they're like, but when I used to teach classes at high schools there, I said, well, how many kids are going to graduate? And they kind of look around and go, every hand goes up. How many kids can do math and reading? Well, the hands look up. They think I'm weird asking this question. The idea that you would have a graduation and you can't read and do math at that grade level, it was like I was speaking a different language because I was speaking a different language. They couldn't understand it. There's a social cohesion. Amy lost her credit card on a Friday. Police station called and said, oh, we have your credit card. And she said, well, come over. They said, no, we're going to be closed. You can come back Monday. There's no police station in Chicago closed between Friday and Monday. Zip. Hey, we have your credit card. Don't worry. Somebody handed it in. We're closing. You can come back Monday, 9 a.m., like office hours at a dentist. Name me, you think the 10th district is closed on Friday to some Monday in Chicago? The 7th? Not a chance. So it's an incredible, there's a lot. Now, I want to say this also, and then we flip to this last thing, and I'll just shut up here. We as a country, we all go, oh, diversity is our greatest strength. It could also be our greatest liability. Our enemies in Russia and China and Iran are using our diversity against us. I did a citizenship ceremony on the Abraham Lincoln. 17 people, 11 countries, 3 continents. It's a normal thing. We get people from around the world. The incredible pride because, and I was wondering, how does Abraham Lincoln, 5,000 people in a small space, it's like a little municipality, work? The head of the Vice Admiral says, we have a singular mission. That diversity works because there's a foundation. We have lost our civic foundation as a country. We need to recreate it. In the same way when people looked at the photo of the women Olympic gymnastics team, everybody goes, oh, the diversity. Correct. What was wrapped around that diversity? The American flag. They didn't all carry separate flags. We need a foundation so our diversity becomes an asset, not a liability. And what we can learn from them, and we had it in different periods of our American history, create that foundation so that our diversity and that comes from different parts of the globe becomes a real strength, and it is a strength, but it is being used by our opponents as a liability. And we have keep breaking ourselves down into more and more different subgroups, and we've lost any interest in what binds us. Not interest, but we've lost the capacity to find that commonality. It's not just our humanity. It's our belief in this country, its values, and what it stands for.
Ambassador Rahm Emanuel, everybody.